Okay, so good day, everyone. And thank you very much for joining me in this virtual presentation to learn more about Bermuda's draft Marine Spatial Plan. So my name is Sarah Brooks, and I'm the Marine Spatial Planning Specialist for the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Programme. And I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so telling you about the Marine Spatial Plan. And you can really think of this document as a big management plan for Bermuda's waters, okay? It is technical and it is in depth, but its main purpose is to guide the management of Bermuda's oceans. And I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll have a better idea of what's in the Marine Spatial Plan, how it was created, and what the next steps are. Okay, so I hope that you're all familiar with the Blue Economy Strategy. This makes up the first part of Bermuda's Blue Prosperity Plan. The Marine Spatial Plan makes up the second part. If you're not familiar with this strategy, then please do check out our other virtual presentation. You can find it on our website under the Blue Economy section. But the goals that are in this strategy are to facilitate sustainable fisheries, expand sustainable marine tourism, produce cleaner, cheaper energy, and to increase blue investment in Bermuda. Now, these goals really are for the purposes of growing the economy in sustainable ocean-related sectors. And in order to do this, we really need to look after Bermuda's marine resources so that we have natural capital available so that we can attract those investments and actually grow the economy. And we do this through marine spatial planning, okay? It really is Bermuda's marine spatial plan that's going to help to protect these really valuable marine assets so that we can have this thriving blue economy. And these two documents work together to make Bermuda's Blue Prosperity Plan. So what's in the draft Marine Spatial Plan? Well, it's essentially made up of three major components, and I will go into more details about each of them a little later, but just to summarize here, the first major component is the proposed Marine Protected Area Network, and this is a network of newly proposed protected areas that would be managed alongside our currently legislated areas, and together this would enable the government to achieve its commitment of fully protecting 20% of Bermuda's waters. I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about this particular component, but I will touch on the others as well. The second of which is the potential use areas. And this has been split up into potential development areas for renewable energy and also potential conservation areas for habitat restoration. And then the final component is the management goals and objectives. And these are all things non-spatial that can't be drawn on a map. And they aim to deal with issues such as enforcement or marine development, environmental health, sustainable fisheries, and a lot more. Okay, so let's start by talking about the first major component then, and that is the proposed Marine Protected Area Network. And this is usually the first thing that people think of when they hear about the Marine Spatial Plan or they think about BOPP. And it's essentially a network of protected areas that would limit certain activities in certain places in an effort to better manage Bermuda's oceans. So this network is trying to achieve several things, okay? First of all, it's trying to improve habitat resilience to environmental stresses. And this should better enable our marine habitats to deal with things like climate change and natural disasters. And this in turn would protect our local infrastructure and ultimately our local communities. It's also aiming to maintain and improve the health of our various marine habitats. And we hope that this in turn will produce more fish. And it would do this by essentially providing these fish with refuge areas for them to grow and reproduce and go on to replenish other areas in an effect known as spillover. And this would basically act as an insurance policy for our fishing industries and our tourism sector, because it would ensure that there are sustainable fish stocks for future generations to utilize. Now, there are many other countries in the world that have implemented protected areas and seen benefits, okay? When it comes to the fishing sector, some of these countries have seen that their fishermen have been able to catch more fish in less time and for less effort. And often those fish are larger, more valuable fish. And this also has positive effects for the consumer as well, because the fishermen are able to supply a greater amount of local fish. It's often offered to the consumer for cheaper, and this in turn reduces the reliance on foreign imports. So it's actually better for long-term food security. And then, of course, healthier habitats and more fish is also good for the tourism sector. And again, there are examples of countries that have implemented protected areas and have seen benefits to their tourism sector, because it helps to attract tourists who want to experience a vibrant and healthy marine environment. So this type of network can be good for tourism and all the businesses associated with that, which in Bermuda is many. And it also helps to attract investments and provide future opportunities to expand these industries as well. So I'm going to go into more detail about what this network actually means for Bermuda in just a moment. But first, I'd like to give some details on the process about how this network was actually developed. Okay, so how was it created? Well, first of all, we looked at what the global science said, okay? We looked at where protected areas had been implemented in other places, and we looked at what worked in those places and what didn't. And what that science shows is that protected areas are often most effective when you protect a variety of different habitat types, when nursery habitats are included, when spawning sites are prioritized, and when areas of ecological importance are also included in the network. So those would be areas that are high in fish diversity, for example, or have good coral cover. And also that a network of smaller protected areas provides better resilience if large protected areas can't be established. We then used that information to create a set of mapping objectives. Okay, these objectives were also guided by local stakeholder input. So we went to the general public, we went to our local scientists, and we went to focus stakeholder groups and asked for their opinions from their unique ocean user perspectives. And these were some of the objectives that were created on the back of those consultations. Okay, so there was an objective to protect a representative 20% coverage of each key habitat type, an objective to protect 50% of juvenile fish nursery habitat that are important for our juvenile fish to grow, to prioritize the protection of spawning sites that are important for fish reproduction, to protect 40% of seamounts, and also to protect areas used by unique, rare and threatened species. So this list of objectives can really be thought of as an instruction manual for creating Bermuda's marine protected area network. Okay, it's an instruction manual that's been created by Bermudians for Bermuda that has also been informed by science. But obviously, in order to achieve those objectives, we really needed to fully understand what Bermuda's waters look like. So we spoke to our local scientists and they provided us with the best available data that allowed us to draw maps of Bermuda's marine environment. And what you can see on the screen here is really just a small sample of some of the data layers that were used. But thanks to our local scientists, we were able to map what Bermuda's main habitat zones look like. We were also able to map important coral and important fish areas, and also important nursery habitats such as seagrass. We also wanted to make sure that the network takes account of how people use the ocean to reduce conflict as much as possible. So we spoke to lots of different types of stakeholders about how they use and value the ocean, and that resulted in additional human use objectives as well. For example, we added an objective to protect areas of historical significance. We're all aware of how big a part shipwrecks play in Bermuda's identity. They link to myths about the Bermuda Triangle. They also tell a story about the settlement of Bermuda. You know, the original settlement happened through survivors of a shipwreck. So these shipwreck areas really tell a story about Bermuda's history. They kind of act as an interactive museum. So we wanted to make sure that this was incorporated in our protected area network. And by speaking to local experts, we were able to find out where in Bermuda's waters are the most significant for shipwrecks. And what you can see on the slide here is a heat map. And this basically shows the number of wrecks or historic artifacts per kilometre squared. And the darker the red, the more wrecks are located in those areas. We also spoke to members of the fishing community about what they wanted out of this plan. Now, obviously, fishing provides a livelihood to many people in Bermuda. It's also done recreationally to provide food for local families. And it's also an enjoyable pastime for many people. So, you know, we wanted to acknowledge that fishing is a big part of Bermuda's culture and to hear what these stakeholders had to say. One of the things that we heard from these stakeholders is how important pelagic fishing is in Bermuda. Pelagic fishing usually happens in the deeper areas on the edge of the Bermuda platform and usually focus on species such as tuna or wahoo or mahi-mahi. And this type of fishing accounts for 50% of the commercial fish species landed in Bermuda. And it also supports the sports fishing tournaments, which is a big contributor to Bermuda's economy. So based on this feedback, there's an objective to maintain pelagic fishing around the platform, and also an objective to maintain access to the most highly valued fishing grounds across the Bermuda platform, acknowledging that our local fishermen do utilize most of the platform. So in order to avoid these most valuable fishing areas when designing the protected area network, we needed to visualize where people fish. And we did this through ocean use surveys, okay? So we asked members of the recreational and commercial fishing communities to show us on a map the areas that they use and value the most. And these responses were then collated together and analysed to produce these heat maps that you can see on the screen. Now, these particular heat maps give an overview of each of those sectors, but they can be broken down further so that you can see how different types of fishing occur on our platform. And one of the reasons for extending the consultation period last year was actually to further refine these maps to make sure that we could get the most accurate information on how our fishermen use the platform in different ways for the different types of fishing. So these maps here, along with the other data layers that I described in previous slides, were all put together and considered when designing a protected area network for Bermuda, with the aim of finding the right balance between avoiding user conflict while also protecting enough ecological value that will actually see the benefits of spillover. And this was the network that was considered the most appropriate for Bermuda by our steering committee. Okay, there were several other scenarios considered, but this is the one that was considered to be the best when it came to the consideration of human uses and balancing those uses with the needs of the environment. Okay, so let's have a closer look at what some of these protected areas actually mean. So this is the proposals for the offshore area. You can see the Bermuda platform and banks in the middle, and then the outer circle here is the 200 nautical mile boundary of our exclusive economic zone. And the different shapes that you can see assign different levels of protection based on the colour, okay? So the green areas show where full protection is proposed and therefore where no extractive activities would be allowed. And these types of activities would include fishing, mining, dumping, development, and extractive research. The light blue area that you can see shows the pelagic zone protected area, and this would prohibit activities that would directly damage the seabed. Okay, so these activities would include things like mining, development and extractive research, but would still allow for sustainable fishing of pelagic species at the surface. And if we take a closer look at what Bermuda's offshore habitats actually look like, you can see why these areas have been proposed. Okay, so firstly, they cover a diversity of different habitats. So under the sea, just like on land, you find underwater mountains, underwater hills, underwater cliffs, and underwater plains. And just like on land, you would expect to find different species living in these different habitats. So by protecting a wide variety of different habitats, we would also be protecting a wide variety of different species. You'll also notice that the network focuses protection on seamounts, and that's what you can see with these brown areas here. Now, seamounts are underwater mountains, and they are considered to be very ecologically valuable. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that is in just a moment. But the last thing I want to say before I move on to that is that this network also attempts to reduce user conflict by avoiding the most highly used fishing areas. So first of all, you can see that these two fully protected areas here are located quite far away from the platform, and that's where the majority of Bermuda's fishing happens. And also that this area here, A3, now this covers a seamount, so it's considered to be ecologically valuable, but due to its proximity to the platform, it's also often used by Bermuda's offshore fishermen. And as a seamount, we wanted to recognize its value and offer high protection while also allowing for small-scale sustainable pelagic fishing at the surface that's important for Bermuda's fishing industry. Okay, and then this slide is basically a visual demonstration of what I've just described. So you get the idea that by protecting a wide variety of different habitats, we're also protecting lots of different depth zones, lots of different conditions, and thereby including more species in our areas of protection. And then when it comes to seamounts are often known to be hotspots for biodiversity. And this is because of the way they interact with ocean currents. Okay, so what often happens is a current will come along and it'll hit a seamount and it'll cause an upwelling. And this upwelling will bring up nutrients from the ocean floor to the surface. And this attracts lots of different species. Okay, so in a way, they kind of act like feeding stations and will attract fish and other animals from other locations. It means that these areas can be particularly vulnerable to extraction. When it comes to fishing, the risk of bycatch is often higher. But also, Bermuda have pretty good maps of its seamounts compared to many other countries. So being able to locate and justify these areas for protection was a relatively easy task. Okay, and this slide shows our proposals for the nearshore area. The colour scheme is similar to the offshore in the sense that you have the green areas which are fully protected and therefore no extractive activities would be allowed. The blue areas again show the pelagic zone, and this would prohibit activities that directly damage the seabed but would permit surface fishing. We also have the orange areas which show the seasonal closure areas. And these are important for commercial fish species. Now, currently, there are fishing restrictions that prohibit fishing at certain times of year. So that legislation currently exists, and that legislation would be the same. But on top of that, all types of development and also shipping in these areas would be prohibited. And then the yellow area is the lobster reservoir. So again, this area currently prohibits lobster trapping. Those restrictions would be the same, but in addition to that, dredging and large-scale development such as renewable energy would also be prohibited in this area. And again, if we look at what Bermuda's offshore nearshore habitats look like, you can see that the network incorporates a variety of different habitat types because those protected areas are spread across the platform. And they're not only spread from east to west, but they're also spread from the shoreline out to deeper waters. And This essentially incorporates lots of key habitat types, which provide refuge areas for fish during the different stages of their life. So these areas can really protect those fish and act as fisheries replenishment zones for the rest of the platform. As well as covering lots of different habitat types, this network also includes important coral areas, important fish areas, important areas for historic wrecks, and it also includes a lot of important nursery areas, again, where fish can grow from juveniles into adults and go on to replenish other parts of the platform. And a big part of this conservation of nursery habitats is in the coastal protection proposals. Okay, so a major component of this proposed network is in our coastal protection plan, in which all established mangrove habitat is given full protection with a 10-metre buffer and then an additional 50-metre no fishing buffer. And that's what you can see here. This green area is the fully protected mangroves, and the orange is the 50-metre no fishing buffer. And, mangroves are not only important nursery habitat, but they also provide shoreline protection against erosion and adverse weather conditions, which is some of the reasons why they have been prioritised for protection. You'll also notice other parts of the proposed plan, such as this bay here, but there are other key bays and shoreline areas that have been proposed for protection because they are important baitfish areas, or they are important for other nursery habitats such as seagrass. And what you can see in this slide is really just a small sample of the coastal protection plan, but you can see the full extent of it in the Marine Spatial Plan document. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the Marine Protected Area Network. And I would like to spend a moment talking about the other components as well. I won't talk about it for as long, I promise, but just to briefly cover the potential use areas. So we have potential use areas for renewable energy and also habitat restoration. And the first thing that I should point out about these maps is that they are not legislated maps, okay? It's not like the marine protected areas where it would actually be illegal to carry out certain activities in certain areas. These are not legally zoned maps. They are purely descriptive, and they are basically meant as an initial stage in the decision-making process to help developers and help resource managers in that decision-making process. So on the left, you can see an example of one of our renewable energy heat maps. And in this case, it's for fixed wind energy, but the Marine Spatial Plan also has maps for floating wind, floating solar, and wave energy as well. And a modelling approach was applied to create this map. And it created a suitability index, which is what you can see here with this red-yellow colour scale. And the red areas basically show where would be considered the most suitable for renewable energy development. The yellow areas show where would be considered less suitable. And the white areas show where would be considered completely unsuitable for renewable energy development. And this model mainly considers environmental constraints. So it looks at things like where the most important coral areas are, where the most important seagrass areas are, where some of our important legislated areas are, or the shipping lanes, and uses that to apply an index of suitability. But it also considers some other factors as well, such as the high use fishing areas, and also some of the technological limitations of the different renewable energy types, such as depth limitations or distance from the platform, distance from land, sorry. And then the map on the right shows one of our habitat restoration maps. In this case, it shows where mangrove restoration might be the most viable. But again, the Marine Spatial Plan also has maps for seagrass and coral restoration as well. And this particular map considers different environmental factors that are needed for successful mangrove growth. So it looks at things like what the underlying substrate is and whether or not mangroves can actually grow there. It looks at the ability for those habitats to migrate inland with sea level rise. It looks at the proximity to existing mangroves so that when we do mangrove restoration, we build upon what we've already got and we do restoration on more of a landscape scale. And then finally, it looks at whether or not the land is publicly owned, with the idea that if restoration is done in a government-owned nature reserve, we know that the owners will grant permission for restoration to take place and that they have the inclination to do so. And then the final component that I'd like to talk to you about is the management goals and objectives. So this is what guides all the non-mapped elements of the Marine Spatial Plan. Okay, so it deals with issues such as improved environmental health, maintaining sustainable fisheries, enhancing blue tourism, improving enforcement, science, education, public outreach, and much, much more. Again, these objectives were created on the back of stakeholder input. So they went to the Bermuda public and our ocean stakeholders, and they were asked what they would like to see when it comes to the management of Bermuda's oceans, what they thought worked, what they thought doesn't work. And this was used to create a set of management objectives. And the Marine Spatial Plan actually have 31 of these objectives, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but they are all available in the draft Marine Spatial Plan if anyone wants to know more details. I will talk about just one of those examples though, and that's in relation to improved enforcement. So this is something that I think almost every single stakeholder has told us they would like to see improved, okay? Everyone thinks that we need better enforcement in Bermuda, and this is something that's been incorporated into the draft plan through several objectives. Okay, so first of all, we are drafting a marine enforcement strategy. Okay, this is currently being drafted by the Bermuda government, and it lays out a concrete plan for obtaining more funds and resources to improve local enforcement. And this includes things like better use of technology, providing training opportunities, and working with external entities to share resources, and things like that. There's also an objective to improve the monitoring of enforcement. We need to check whether our enforcement is effective and whether or not people are complying with it. And if they're not, why not? So this basically allows us to monitor how effective our enforcement is and know whether or not we need to make improvements. And then the final objective is to raise awareness about existing and new marine regulations. And the idea behind this is that people are more likely to follow the rules and they're more likely to self-police if they understand why those rules are in place. So, we are listening to your feedback and we are incorporating it, but we do also acknowledge that this is still a draft. So there is still opportunities for you to provide more feedback. So, with enforcement, for example, have a think about what good enforcement looks like to you. Let us know what those details are. Is it more patrol vessels in the water? Is it a better use of technology? Is it training of the judicial system? Like, have a think about what good enforcement looks like to you, and let us know. But also have a think about this in terms of Bermuda's wider ocean management. Have a think about how would you like to see Bermuda's waters managed when it comes to things like environmental health, tourism, fisheries management, renewable energy, and anything else? And please do let us know if you have any thoughts on that. Okay, so next steps then. So as I mentioned, this is a draft plan, so we do still want to hear from you on both the Blue Economy Strategy and the Marine Spatial Plan. We really want locals to help shape what these plans look like. Even though consultations officially ended at the end of December, we are still keeping channels open for receiving feedback. So please feel free to get in touch with us via the Bermuda Citizens Forum. Otherwise, you can feel free to send an email or contact any of the site team, And you can also get in touch through the contact form on our website. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation for the Marine Spatial Plan. And I want to thank you very much for listening. I realize that it's very heavy going, so I appreciate it if you have stuck through to the end and listened to this for 30 minutes. I do hope that you understand what's in it a little better. And if you do have any questions, like I said, please do get in touch with us. All the contact details are on our website. Thank you.